In the winter of 1942, a year marked by rapid shifts in momentum and escalating global stakes, the Allied command authorized a series of covert missions so sensitive that even many senior officers were unaware of their existence. These operations, launched by the British Special Operations Executive and the newly formed American Office of Strategic Services, were designed for one purpose: to fracture the intelligence networks that fed the German war machine. Yet long after the war ended, fragments of these missions would remain hidden in sealed files, raising questions about what went wrong and why the Allies preferred not to revisit them. The story begins not on a battlefield, but in a dimly lit basement beneath London's Baker Street, where SOE planners worked under constant pressure. They operated in a haze of cigarette smoke, maps spread across wooden tables, red pins tracing enemy communications hubs across occupied Europe. Each operation required absolute secrecy. The stakes were extraordinary. One captured agent could unravel an entire network of resistance fighters and sabotage teams. And by early 1942, Germany's intelligence apparatus, the Abwehr, had demonstrated a frightening talent for exposing Allied infiltrators. But the pressure to act outweighed the risks. The Germans were strengthening their hold over Europe, their confidence bolstered by victories stretching from the Arctic to North Africa. As the Wehrmacht advanced, the window of opportunity for resistance operations narrowed. Thus, the SOE, supported by the OSS, crafted missions meant to strike deep, disrupt logistical chains, and sever the flow of intelligence that kept German command one step ahead. These missions often required parachuting into remote valleys, forging relationships with locals, and navigating a landscape of collaborators, double agents, and concealed patrols. The human struggle behind these assignments was immense. Trainees from the SOE's paramilitary school in Airseig, Scotland, were briefed with only the bare essentials. Many were young, barely out of university or the merchant marine. They practiced demolitions, clandestine communications, and silent movement through dense forests. A single mistake would cost them their lives. A declassified training note from April 1942 contains a chilling line: "Your margin for error is zero. The enemy's margin for luck is unlimited." It became a quiet mantra for the men and women who boarded transport planes with no guarantee of return. Historical context reveals just how volatile the covert landscape was. The Abwehr, led by Admiral Wilhelm Canaris, was not only effective but deeply embedded across occupied territories. Their informants infiltrated resistance groups, and their radio interception teams tracked clandestine transmissions with increasing accuracy. In this environment, the Allies pushed forward with missions that, even by wartime standards, bordered on reckless. Planners believed that the only way to break the enemy's momentum was to strike at the roots of its intelligence infrastructure. Saboteurs would target key relay stations, assassinate German liaison officers, or smuggle out stolen documents. Many missions never even reached the operational stage. Others were carried out only partially, muffled in records by vague references such as "Operation Discontinued due to changes in situation." The first hint of something unusual appears in the classified appendices to SOE's Scandinavian operations. A small number of mission reports are redacted almost entirely, pages containing nothing but black ink and the faint imprint of what had once been typed. One entry simply states, "Outcome: indeterminate. Personnel: missing. Status: closed by order of C&C." Another file from late 1942 indicates that American observers were present on missions officially listed as British only, suggesting coordination that was never publicly acknowledged. Why this secrecy? Historians believe several factors converged. Some missions may have exposed vulnerabilities within Allied security, moles, intercepted transmissions, or miscommunications between London and field units. Others may have involved diplomatic sensitivities, especially in countries like Sweden or Spain, where neutrality concealed fragile, unofficial cooperation. And at least a few were likely covered up because they produced results too contradictory, too politically sensitive, or too embarrassing to reveal. As researchers today sift through the surviving documents, they notice patterns: gaps in communication logs, contradictory after-action notes, operations that vanish from the timeline without explanation. These fragments raise a compelling question. Were these missions simply failures, or did they reveal intelligence that the Allies felt safer burying? There is a modern lesson embedded in this uncertainty. Even in an era defined by clarity of purpose, defeating fascism, information remained a currency to be controlled, shaped, and sometimes erased. Secrecy protected agents, but also obscured truths. The Allied command understood that what the world learned after the war could influence geopolitics just as powerfully as what happened on the battlefield. And so, as the curtain falls on this first chapter, we are left with an unsettling truth. The origins of the Allies' most mysterious World War II operations were not born from confidence, but from fear. Fear of losing the intelligence war, fear of unseen enemies, and fear that some actions, once revealed, might alter the story of the conflict itself. This fear would set the stage for operations that would soon go missing from the official record, including the first major attempt that would test the limits of secrecy in the frozen interior of Norway. The frozen mountains of Norway have long guarded the secrets of one of the Allies' most enigmatic missions of the early war. In 1942 and 1943, the struggle to sabotage Germany's heavy water production, a critical resource for its atomic research, became one of the most daring covert efforts undertaken by the Special Operations Executive. The public often hears the story in broad strokes: brave commandos, dramatic explosions, a blow to the Nazi nuclear program. But deeper in the classified archive lies a quieter, darker thread, an early infiltration attempt that quietly vanished from the record, involving a small SLE team whose fate remains an unresolved wartime riddle. The mission was known informally among planners as the First Knock. Long before the famous raids on Vemork, a lesser-known reconnaissance team was dispatched to Telemark in late 1942 to map security patterns, contact local saboteurs, and prepare landing zones for incoming commandos. The team consisted of 4 men, 2 Norwegian nationals trained in Britain, 1 British radio operator, and an intelligence liaison whose identity remains partially redacted even today. Their insertion would take place under impossibly harsh conditions. Telemark's snowfields were among the most unforgiving in occupied Europe, with temperatures plunging below -20 degrees Celsius and winds that could strip a man's wool as quickly as his warmth. They departed from an RAF base in northern Scotland aboard a Halifax bomber modified for clandestine drops. The flight log notes a smooth outbound leg, but the aircrew later recalled radio interference over the Skagerrak Strait, forcing the aircraft to fly lower than planned. The drop was executed at 2:14 hours, moonless, silent, and exact. But from the moment their boots touched Norwegian snow, the intelligence trail began to blur. Their scheduled contact in the local resistance, codenamed Torvald, did not appear at the rendezvous point 2 nights in a row. On the 3rd night, the team transmitted a brief message back to London. Delayed. Situation uncertain. Requesting confirmation of contact status. London acknowledged. No further messages were ever heard. The struggle those men faced was immense. The region around Rjukan was crawling with German patrols, many of them hardened Gebirgsjäger mountain troops who knew the terrain intimately. Intercepted German reports later revealed that local collaborators had tipped off the occupation authorities about foreign infiltrators in the area, though the dates are frustratingly vague, making it impossible to confirm whether the tip-off referred to this specific team. Surviving Norwegian resistance diaries mention hearing unfamiliar radio signals in the valley, but no one reported seeing the agents in person. The men were essentially blind, isolated, and unsure whether the resistance network around them was compromised. A fragment of historical insight comes from an SUE operations memo dated November 1942. Telemark security appears tighter than preliminary assessment indicated. Proceed with caution. Possible Abwehr interception of internal channels. The implication is chilling. The Abwehr's radio interception regiments had become increasingly adept at triangulating clandestine transmissions. If the team sent even a single message from a predictable pattern of locations, the Germans could have pinpointed their rough position. And yet, no German capture reports from the period identify a group of 4 agents, matching their description. The reveal begins in the contradictions. British intelligence files record the team as missing, presumed captured, but German wartime documentation lists no interrogations, no kills, and no bodies found in the region that match the team's profiles. A post-war inquiry conducted in 1947 concluded, outcome unknown. Records insufficient. Norwegian locals interviewed decades later spoke of hearing shooting in the mountains, of tracks in the snow that abruptly ended at a cliff edge, and even of German trucks moving at night with covered cargo. None of these accounts have been formally linked to the missing team, but the timing aligns uncomfortably well. For historians, the question has never been merely what happened, but why the files remain incomplete. One theory is operational embarrassment. If the team compromised security or walked into an WWII trap, the WWII may have chosen to quietly bury the lessons learned, especially because later, more successful operations would shape the public narrative. Another possibility is that their intelligence liaison, whose name still appears partially censored, may have been tied to a sensitive diplomatic channel that remains classified under long-term secrecy rules. There is also the unsettling possibility that the team stumbled upon unexpected German activity, perhaps a convoy, a hidden facility, or a patrol pattern that London decided not to acknowledge publicly. And yet, the human element remains the most haunting. These were not faceless operatives. Each left behind letters and training evaluations describing them as determined, resourceful, and quietly proud of the mission ahead. One letter from a Norwegian recruit to his sister reads, "If we succeed, no one will know, but that is the work we chose." Their disappearance embodies the silent cost of the clandestine war, missions whose outcomes may never be known, sacrifices made without recognition, and questions that linger long after the documents have been archived. As this chapter closes, the tension deepens. What happened in the Telemark Mountains was only the beginning. Within a year, another Allied unit would vanish under similarly mysterious circumstances, this time not in the snow-covered north, but along the rocky shores of Sicily, on the eve of the largest amphibious assault the Mediterranean had ever seen. The rugged shoreline of Sicily, with its jagged cliffs and hidden inlets, hides a lesser-known mystery of the Mediterranean campaign, an OSS reconnaissance team that vanished in the critical days before Operation Husky in July 1943. The public story of Husky emphasizes the scale, the largest amphibious assault mounted by the Allies up to that point, involving British 8th Army units landing on the southeast tip of the island and American forces striking the western beaches. But deep within the classified record sits a mission that was meant to be small, silent, and surgical, one whose disappearance left planners uneasy at the most dangerous moment of the operation. The hook begins with a little-known detail. Before any landing ship sailed, the Office of Strategic Services deployed maritime unit teams to gather intelligence on coastal defenses. These were not conventional infantrymen, but specialists trained in stealth, precursors to the modern Navy SEALs. Their equipment was cutting-edge for its time: rebreather scuba rigs, collapsible canoes made of black-dyed canvas, and waterproof cylinders for maps and cameras. The goal was simple yet perilous: observe Axis troop concentrations and report whether the German 15th Panzer Grenadier Division had reinforced the beaches, as some intercepted messages suggested. Their struggle began before they even touched Sicilian waters. The OSS team, for Americans and one British liaison officer, set out from a British submarine operating east of Malta. The submarine's log from July 1st records moderate seas, electrics malfunctioning intermittently, forcing the vessel to surface more often than planned. Surfacing risk detection from German aircraft flying out of bases in Sicily and Sardinia. Even so, under cover of night, the team boarded their folding canoe and paddled toward the shadowy coastline near Avola, their designated reconnaissance zone. Their first radio transmission reached Allied command at 3:10 hours on July 2nd. It was short and precise. Landing complete. No contact. Will proceed to points M and L. This was the last confirmed message anyone received. When the submarine returned to the extraction point 48 hours later, the cove was silent. No signal flares. No radio pulse. No team. Historical insight offers clues but no answers. The OSS detachment briefing document notes that German radar had recently been installed at Capo Muro di Porco, barely 15 kilometers from the team's landing site. The Germans had also deployed naval patrols, converted fishing vessels equipped with machine guns and searchlights to hunt for British commandos, who had been harassing Axis supply routes for months. But there were no German records of capturing an Allied reconnaissance unit that week. No interrogations. No bodies recovered. Axis situation reports from July 3rd make no mention of coastal incidents. It is the absence of evidence, not the presence of it, that unsettles historians. A diary entry from a Royal Navy signal officer adds another layer. Dated July 5th, it reads, OSS Team A4 overdue. Command reviewing alternative sources. Unclear whether enemy action or misnavigation. The idea of misnavigation is plausible. The rocky coastline could confuse even trained operatives, especially at night. If the team landed too far south, they might have run into Italian carabinieri patrols. If they went north, they risked hitting German defensive posts around Syracuse. But misnavigation alone does not explain the total lack of recovery. The reveal comes from a fragment of intelligence withdrawn from public view until the 1990s. A decrypted Luftwaffe message intercepted by Ultra on July 4th refers to unidentified naval activity off the southeastern coast. The message is vague, perhaps intentionally so, but it records German aircraft dispatched to investigate. The aircraft reported no visual targets, but in wartime radio jargon, the phrase can mean many things. It could indicate they found nothing, or it could suggest they identified something they weren't authorized to report through insecure channels. There is another possibility, whispered among OSS veterans in post-war interviews. The team may have stumbled upon a German naval formation transferring equipment or personnel in the days before Husky. Some intelligence analysts believe the Germans moved small stocks of radar components and communication gear along the Sicilian coastline to avoid Allied air observation. If the OSS team witnessed such activity, the Germans might have dealt with them swiftly and silently, disposing of the canoe and equipment at sea. The human dimension of the operation deepens the mystery. 2 members of the team kept journals during training, fragments of which survive in OSS archives. One wrote, "If this works, we clear the path. If it fails, the landings may go in blind." The weight of their task, ensuring the safety of tens of thousands of soldiers, must have pressed them with every paddle stroke that night. Their families received notifications not of death, but of disappearance, a classification that for many became a decades-long source of quiet torment. A modern lesson emerges. Intelligence operations, even those essential to massive strategic events, can vanish beneath the enormity of war. Success is often public. Failure is often buried. The disappearance of the OSS team forced Allied planners to rely on fragmentary aerial photography and incomplete resistance reports when finalizing the Husky assault. They proceeded, but with a lingering question of what the missing team had seen. And as Part 3 closes, the tension shifts thousands of miles away, from the Mediterranean to the Pacific. For the next mysterious operation, British commandos would vanish not among cliffs and coastlines, but in the jungled outskirts of Singapore, during a mission whose contradictions still spark debates among military historians. In the dense, humid jungles around Singapore, a place where sound carried strangely and shadows lingered long after sunset, the Allies carried out one of their most controversial and least understood missions of the war, Operation Remo. To the public eye, Remo is often overshadowed by the earlier and more successful Operation WWII, in which British and Australian commandos raided Japanese shipping undetected. But Remo, launched in late 1944, was meant to be a bolder, more destructive sequel. Instead, it became a story of disappearances, conflicting records, and uneasy silence, an operation the Allies rarely spoke of in detail, even long after the war had ended. The operation began with a hook found in a single planning document dated May 1944. Success may significantly disrupt Japanese naval operations in the region. Extreme discretion required. The phrase extreme discretion was unusually stern, even by covert warfare standards. That caution reflected an awareness that Singapore was among the most heavily surveilled cities in the Japanese Empire, with a Kempei's reputation for brutal counterintelligence, well known to Allied planners. Yet the stakes were considered worth the risk. Japan's supply lanes in the South China Sea remained vital, and Allied command believed a decisive strike could hinder troop movements toward the Philippines. The struggle for the men of Z Special Unit, the predominantly Australian and British commando team assigned to the mission, was evident from the start. Training for remote took place in remote corners of Western Australia, where operatives practiced long-distance paddling, stealth landings, and the use of limpet mines, devices they planned to attach to Japanese ships under the cover of darkness. But unlike WWII, which relied on disguises and subterfuge, Remo would use more advanced technology. Sleeping Beauty, submersible vehicles, experimental one-man craft capable of underwater movement. The goal was ambitious: infiltrate Singapore harbor, destroy multiple ships, and escape undetected into the surrounding islands. Historical insight shows the mission encountered trouble before it even reached its staging point. The submarine HMS Porpoise transported the team toward the vicinity of the Riau Islands, a cluster of jungle-covered landmasses south of Singapore. A storm forced the sub to surface repeatedly, and logs indicate brief radar contacts, possibly Japanese patrol aircraft, trailing the vessel. Still, the commandos managed to offload their equipment and establish a temporary base on Marapas Island, from which they would launch their assault. A surviving field note from one commando reads, "Island quiet. Locals scarce. Enemy boats sighted in distance at dusk." Even this early, there were signs the Japanese were increasing maritime patrols. Whether they were already aware of Allied activity remains disputed. One controversial theory suggests that Japanese command had quietly strengthened coastal surveillance weeks before Remo began, possibly due to information extracted from captured resistance fighters in Malaya. Another theory, supported by fragmentary naval logs, hints at Japanese suspicion following unusual radio traffic in the area, traffic that may or may not have been connected to the Remo team. The reveal of what happened next is embedded in contradictions. According to official Allied documentation, the team successfully launched towards Singapore, intending to attach limpet mines to a convoy anchored in the harbor. However, complications forced them to abort the direct harbor assault. Instead, they targeted smaller vessels near the entrance to the harbor, sinking several. Radio messages stopped shortly after the attack. The assumption was that the team scattered into the islands to evade capture. Japanese wartime records, however, paint a different picture. Some documents indicate several commandos were captured alive in the weeks following the attack, found hiding in caves or attempting to escape toward Sumatra. Other records, long contested by historians, suggest that at least one submersible craft was recovered intact, an assertion the Allied post-war inquiry avoided addressing directly. When cross-referenced, the records don't match. Dates differ. Locations contradict. Even the numbers of men captured vary between sources. What is certain is that the commandos displayed extraordinary resilience. Japanese interrogation notes describe them as highly trained, physically strong, and unwilling to provide information. Several escaped custody only to be recaptured days later. Their journeys through the mangroves and island forests reflect a struggle against not just an enemy force, but exhaustion, hunger, and the sheer immensity of the terrain. One Japanese patrol report states, "Tracks found in sand. Movement silent. Suspect more than one individual. Area searched without result." It's as if the men moved like ghosts, present, yet untraceable. The human dimension of Remo grows heavier when considering the aftermath. Post-war proceedings revealed that several captives were executed shortly before Japan's surrender, though the specifics remain clouded by missed testimonies and incomplete files. Families received ambiguous notifications. Some records were sealed for decades. Even now, historians debate whether all participants have been accounted for. A modern reflection emerges. Covert operations in vast, hostile landscapes leave behind more questions than answers. In the fog of war, truth is often pieced together from fragments, and sometimes, those fragments never align. Rameau's contradictions may stem from misreporting, deliberate wartime deception, or facts deemed too politically sensitive for post-war disclosure. As Part 4 closes, the mystery deepens further. Rameau was not the last operation to vanish into ambiguity. In late 1944, thousands of miles away, another Allied mission would disappear, this time over the icy waters of the North Sea, leaving behind no wreckage, no survivors, and only conflicting radar echoes to mark its passing. The icy expanse of the North Sea has swallowed countless ships and aircraft, but among the losses recorded during the tumultuous final year of the war, one disappearance stands apart: a classified interception mission flown by the U.S. 8th Air Force in late 1944. Official reports describe it only in sparse language. Aircraft failed to return. Cause unknown. But surviving intelligence fragments suggest something more complex, more sensitive. The bomber wasn't flying a typical combat sortie. It had been dispatched to intercept a suspected German courier flight believed to be transporting documents related to advanced weapons development, materials that Allied intelligence was desperate to secure. The hook emerges from a declassified memorandum dated November 1944, unconfirmed orders for transfer of experimental weapon research via courier aircraft. Intercept priority high. At this stage of the war, Germany's secret weapons program, ranging from V-2 rockets to jet-powered aircraft, was a top concern for Allied leaders. Any sign that the Germans were moving crucial data or prototypes out of vulnerable areas, particularly from Western Germany toward Denmark or Norway, triggered immediate response. But the challenge was immense. These courier flights were small, fast, and often flew at night under strict radio silence, making detection difficult. The struggle began long before wheels left the runway. The 8th Air Force crew assigned to the mission belonged to a modified B-24 Liberator outfitted with enhanced radar and long-range fuel tanks. They were seasoned airmen, veterans of dozens of sorties over Germany. On the evening of November 21st, they lifted off from an airfield in East Anglia under overcast skies. The mission briefing had been unusually terse. One crewman later wrote in a postcard never mailed, "Tonight's run feels different. Quiet in the room. Too quiet." Their task was to locate a suspected courier aircraft heading north from the German coast, shadow it, and relay its position to a nearby RAF night fighter squadron. Historical insight reveals that this mission unfolded during a period of heightened radio intelligence activity. Ultra-decrypts had hinted at unusual Luftwaffe communications referencing special cargo and priority flight paths. There was no proof the Germans were moving technical research, but Allied intelligence felt they could not ignore the possibility. What made the mission particularly precarious was the environment. Weather over the North Sea was notoriously unstable, fog rising quickly, winds shifting without warning. Dozens of aircraft had vanished in similar conditions. Even so, the B-24 pressed forward into the dark, blind expanse. The aircraft's last confirmed transmission came at 1946 hours. On station. No contact yet. Conditions moderate. Radar logs from British coastal stations picked up a faint echo consistent with the bomber's position, but at 20:03 hours, technicians noted an unusual interference pattern. Whether it originated from atmospheric distortion, enemy jamming, or equipment malfunction remains unknown. Minutes later, all radar signatures of the aircraft disappeared. There was no distress call, no plea for assistance, just silence. The reveal begins with a contradiction in the surviving documents. A U.S. Army Air Force's after-action report states that no German aircraft were operating in the area that night. Yet a Luftwaffe logbook discovered decades later mentions a brief radar contact with unidentified heavy aircraft near the same coordinates. No engagement is recorded. No interception orders were issued. So, why did the bomber vanish? Some analysts argue that German night fighters flying from bases in Denmark may have been operating under separate, unrecorded orders, a possibility supported by a cryptic reference to increased northern patrols in a German situation summary from the same week. Another puzzle lies in the British radar logs. Technicians reviewing the data weeks later noticed the brief presence of a second echo, fainter, faster moving, near the B-24's last recorded position. The Echo appeared only once, for less than a minute, and then vanished from the scope. No Allied or Axis aircraft were documented flying at that altitude in that sector at that moment. Whether it was an aircraft at all has been debated ever since. Modern reflection suggests that wartime radar, particularly in adverse weather, could easily distort or misidentify signals. But could the faint Echo have been the German courier aircraft the Allies hoped to intercept? And if so, did the bomber approach too closely, possibly revealing itself or triggering defensive action? Complicating matters further, salvage ships sent out after the disappearance reported finding no debris, not even an oil slick. The North Sea can erase all traces quickly, but the total absence of recoverable material remained unusual for an aircraft of that size. A Royal Navy officer involved in the search wrote in his log, "Nothing." As if the sea chose to keep it secret. The human element intensifies the mystery. Families received letters acknowledging the crew as missing rather than killed. Several crew members' personal effects were held in storage until 1947, when the mission was partially declassified, yet even then, key intelligence attachments remained sealed. A surviving crew roster reveals handwritten annotations next to certain names, special duty, restricted, no correspondence, markings typically reserved for operatives involved in sensitive actions. As the chapter closes, the silence around the mission becomes as significant as the disappearance itself. If the bomber did encounter a German courier flight, the failure to recover aircraft or documents might have been politically inconvenient at a time when the Allies were pushing toward victory. Or perhaps the truth lies somewhere deep beneath the waves, lost to weather, chance, and a night of overlapping shadows on radar screens. And so Part 5 ends on a chilling note: a vanished aircraft, a mission buried in classified files, and a thread of secrecy that leads directly into our final mystery, an extraction mission on the collapsing Eastern Front, where a defecting German officer carrying dangerous knowledge never arrived at his rendezvous point. In the final months of the war, as Germany's once mighty fronts collapsed under the relentless pressure of Allied forces, a hidden battle unfolded beneath the chaos, one fought not with tanks or artillery, but with information. Among the most sensitive secrets were those concerning Germany's advanced weapons programs, long-range rockets, jet aircraft, chemical stockpiles, and experimental research scattered across collapsing fronts. In early April 1945, British intelligence initiated an extraction attempt that, if successful, might have yielded one of the most valuable defectors of the entire war. Yet the mission would end not in triumph, but in silence, its final moments lost under the confusion of the Eastern Front, its participants fading into the fog of history. The hook begins with a little-known line from a British MI6 report dated April 2, 1945. Subject claims knowledge of weapons program discrepancies. Urgency extreme. Rendezvous approved. The subject was a mid-level German officer with alleged access to documentation concerning late-war weapons projects. His name was redacted in the surviving files, though later testimonies describe him as an engineer attached to a technical staff in central Germany. According to intercepted communications, he had attempted to contact British intelligence through intermediaries in Denmark and the Netherlands, offering crucial data in exchange for safe passage for himself and his family. MI6 deemed the potential intelligence too significant to ignore. The struggle for the extraction team began even before they entered Germany's collapsing military landscape. The mission was assigned to a small British reconnaissance detachment operating under the 21st Army Group. Their objective was to advance ahead of the main Allied line toward a designated meeting point near the Elbe River, close to the village of Gorleben. The area was a tumultuous battleground, German units retreating west, Soviet forces pressing from the east, civilians fleeing in every direction. The team, consisting of 4 men in a camouflaged Humber Scout car and an accompanying motorcycle dispatch rider, departed under strict radio silence. They carried forged German documents, medical kits, and a single suitcase fitted with coded compartments meant to secure whatever materials the defecting officer might hand over. Historical insight reveals the extraordinary complexity of the collapsing front. By April 1945, German command structures were disintegrating. Units often acted independently. Communication lines were severed or unreliable. Roadblocks appeared and disappeared within hours. MI6 planners knew the risks but pushed forward, believing that any opportunity to capture advanced weapons intelligence, even in the war's dying days, might shape post-war strategic realities. The extraction team reached the outskirts of Gorleben on the afternoon of April 9th. According to the surviving field notes of the mission leader, the roads were littered with burnt-out vehicles and abandoned supply carts. Small groups of German soldiers surrendered readily, their morale broken. Yet amid the collapse, pockets of die-hard resistance remained. Patrols were unpredictable. Communication with headquarters was nearly impossible. Still, as dusk fell, the team positioned themselves near the designated rendezvous, a ruined stone farmhouse overlooking the river, marked by a collapsed roof and a single surviving chimney. The reveal begins with the uncertainty that followed. At 20:15 hours, the team reported via runner to a nearby British unit that they had established static position, awaiting contact. At 2100 hours, they observed distant movement along the tree line, shapes too far to identify. At 2118, the dispatch rider noted hearing sporadic rifle fire to the east, possibly Soviet troops advancing. And then, the final message: rendezvous compromised. Moving to secondary position. Observation required. No further communication was ever received. Conflicting reports cloud the timeline. A British reconnaissance patrol searching the area the next morning found the farmhouse abandoned. Tracks in the dirt indicated at least 5 individuals had been present, but the footprints led in different directions, some toward the riverbank, others toward a wooded ridge. A single British-issue canteen lay near the doorway. No bodies. No documents. No sign of the defecting officer. German and Soviet records offer no clarity. Post-war interviews with residents of nearby villages yielded tantalizing but inconsistent accounts. One farmer claimed to have heard a brief exchange of gunfire shortly after nightfall. Another said she had seen men in dark uniforms moving toward the river at daybreak, as if searching for someone. A Soviet unit diary from the 2nd Guards Tank Army, operating just east of the Elbe that night, reports a small, unidentified vehicle moving at high speed north of their zone, possibly the British scout car attempting to evade incoming troops. Yet what happened to the defecting officer remains the central question. Did he arrive and flee when he saw Soviet forces approaching? Was he intercepted by retreating German units aware of his intentions? Or did he never reach the rendezvous at all? Theories abound. One declassified MI6 analysis from 1952 suggests the officer may have been caught in the chaotic crossfire between advancing Soviet elements and desperate German stragglers. Another posits that Soviet troops may have detained him, recognizing the value of his technical knowledge, a possibility consistent with the early Cold War climate, in which both Allies and Soviets were racing to secure German scientists and research. The human dimension adds emotional gravity. The families of the British team received messages stating the men were missing in action. One notebook recovered months later from the pockets of a soldier killed near the Elbe contained a single haunting line: "We waited. No one came." Whether this referred to the extraction or another encounter remains unclear, yet it symbolizes the despair and uncertainty that marked the war's final days. A modern reflection lingers. In the confusion of collapsing fronts, even missions of immense potential consequence could simply dissolve into the chaos. Political ambiguity, competing intelligence priorities, and the shifting map of late-war Europe combined to bury the truth under layers of conflicting testimony and fading memory. As the documentary draws to a close, the final mystery remains unsolved. The Allies tried to forget some of these operations, not because they were failures, but because they were shadows, incomplete stories that never aligned with official narratives. Missions that vanished. Testimonies that conflicted. Files that remained sealed. And so the record ends, not with certainty, but with the quiet acknowledgement that even in a war defined by vast movements and clear objectives, some stories remain forever concealed, lost to the night, the sea, the jungle, and the final days of a world at war.